Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made my dragon tail and glove for Calianna from Critical Role. To start, I picked up a shiny black wave texture fabric in a basic black stretch knit. I purchased 2 meters of the shiny fabric for this project, but actually ended up choosing not to use the black knit in the end. I started the project by cutting out a long triangle that would reach from my waistline down to the floor with a little bit of extra space. I used some spare fabric to create the first piece of the triangular formation. Taking the black shiny textured fabric, I folded it over itself and laid the piece from before down on top to cut out 2 exact copies. Next up was to create the spiked triangles that go along the top side of the tail. I did this by cutting out sharp triangles on once folded material so it created a duplicate of each triangle. I cut them out in varying sizes with extras so I had options when sewing them into the tail. While referencing the original artwork for Calianna, I chose the pieces that would best work for the project. I laid out the spikes and cut matching shapes in my interfacing. I used a lightweight interfacing that could be ironed on. With the iron set to a medium heat, I attached the interfacing to the inside of the spikes. I folded the spikes with the interfacing side out and sewed the edges closed, leaving a small section unsewn so I could flip it right side out at the end. At this point, I decided to do the ribbed underbelly of the tail with the back side of the shiny fabric as I really liked the texture. I cut out another long piece to match the original too. To create the ribbed effect, I folded the fabric and sewed very close to the edge on the scaled side of the fabric. I continued this all the way down the tail, bringing the folds closer together toward the pointed end. I ironed it on a medium heat to flatten the seams that I had just sewn in. I chose to trim the top of the long panels at this point to reduce the bulk that would sit under the skirt. Taking one of the long panels in the ribbed piece, I pinned them together with the good size facing each other. I repeated this with the other piece as well. Then it was on to sewing the long panels together. While doing this, I did my best to leave ample seam allowance to create a casing for wire I was going to add later. In some parts there just wasn't enough space available, so I did go back and actually add a bias tape to create the casing. Along the top seam of the tail, between the 2 matching long panels near the pointed end, I inserted the spikes and sewed them into the seam. I lined up the wire next to the previous seam, sandwiching it between the two layers of seam allowance. I then sewed another seam along the outside, creating a casing to nestle the wire within. Once the casings were sewn, I gently pushed the wire through. To avoid getting stuck on the fabric and pulling or tearing it, I made a small loop on the end of the wire so it could push through smoothly. I did this part while the tail was inside out, but I would recommend flipping the tail right side out before putting in the wiring to save you some stress later on. Once the wiring was in place, I flipped the tail inside out and straightened out the wires. Using some extra stuffing and an old pillow, I then began to stuff the tail. Once I had achieved the level of fluffiness I wanted for the tail, I then sewed the top shut by folding it over itself and added a strap that would tie around my waist to hold the tail on. To create the glove, I laid fabric down and folded it over itself. I checked which way the stretch of the fabric was and oriented the stretch so it would go across the width of my hand. This would allow it to stretch around my fingers and arm comfortably. I added extra length in the fingers to create the dragon effect. I cut it out in a rectangular panel to allow myself space to sew in the glove. With my sewing machine, I sewed along the chalk lines. I tried the glove on multiple times during this process to make sure that everything fit tightly where it should. With the fit adjusted, I trimmed around the edges of the glove. At this point, I decided to add a black knit fabric to the glove to extend the length. I sewed a tube with the knit fabric and attached it to the end of the glove. Taking some of the stuffing I had for the tail, I added small amounts inside the fingers of the glove. This helped fill them out and look like an extension of my own finger. Using a fake nail set, I took all the fingers that I needed for one hand and I cut them down with scissors into more of a claw-like fashion. I painted them black with a basic black nail polish and then used E6000 to stick them to the glove. And with that, the glove and tail were finished, and my Calianna was complete. Special thank you to my patrons, and if you'd like to see more videos and tutorials like this, please like and subscribe.